All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. That is coming later on in the 2.0 patch, and that is Rosia, the newest Havoc sub DPS's pull value. And let me just say that this character, and we can see pretty much everything about her kit, she's right here in Crossing Stars. This character is a bit of a bait, and today we're going to talk about why. And so you all probably had the opportunity, if you've gone through the main story quest and you've gotten to Act 3 of version 2.0, to play around with her a little bit. And she does have a fairly interesting kit, right? She can go around, she can create tornadoes, she can bounce around, she says Mamma Mia a lot, some could say even too much. And the problem, well, it's safe to say that nobody actually needs her on the roster, especially, right, if you're thinking about Camellia and you're thinking about the teams that she can run, right? Right now, Camellia is currently paired with Sanhua, a basic attack buffer, and this team is incredibly strong already. Sanhua has some of the fastest rotation times in the game, and you end up dealing a massive amount of damage very quickly when using this team comp. And so with Rosia, she's coming in and she's doing a lot of things. We can go ahead, we can take a look at her kit over here. And one of the biggest selling points about this character is her ability to buff Havoc damage as well as basic attack damage, totaling up to about a 45% bonus as long as you're, able to actually activate it. And based off of the initial testing in the main story quest that we've had, she's able to gain her concerto relatively quickly, but she does have a longer field time than Sanhua to actually get all that buffing potential going. And so with that, let's talk about the value. Let's talk about where and why she is a bit of a bait for pretty much every single player, because ladies and gentlemen, you get Sanhua for free, and for a lot of players, she will be at S6. So let's dive right on into it. One of the best parts about Rosia is the fact that for every 0.1% of her critical rate over 50%, activating her ultimate or her liberation will go ahead and increase the attack of every resonator on the team for 30 seconds for up to 200 points. Let's think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. Her total buffs combined, right? Taking a look at all of these are really personal buffs. Taking a look at all the buffs combined, she's going to give you about 200 attack and that Havoc and basic attack amplification buff of around 45% for Camellia to her total damage in a lot of different ways, as well as that 200 attack, right? When you look at Sanhua at her S6, Sanhua is going to increase the attack of all of the characters on your team by 10% per crystal broken. Usually it's 20% pretty much all of the time for 20 seconds. For most players running Camellia, she's going to have a base attack of 1037. And so think about it this way, guys. 20% of 1037 is higher than 200. And so Sanhua at S6 is already granting or 200 attack buff. It's actually above 200. And so for most players who do have Camellia on a 5-star weapon, you can see over here my red spring at 90 out of 90. Sanhua at S6 is going to provide a higher attack buff than Rosia at S0. And this is the thing, guys. The Sanhua and Camellia team over here, it already destroys content. It already completely obliterates pretty much all of the content in the game that isn't Havoc resistant. And so now it's time to talk about some of the other selling points about Rosia's kit. Rosia provides grouping. She provides grouping through the resonance skill that she casts. This will create a tornado. This will create a tornado that will group up the enemies, bring them in, and it actually persists off field. We've seen that in some of the IGN footage and some of the demo footage, and obviously you've been able to experience it yourself. And she also goes ahead and provides another bit of grouping through her magical box, which basically it deals 100 points of Havoc damage. It's an echo skill. It deals utility damage and basically replaces your gadget slot, which is typically where you'll find things like flight, you'll find things like your grappling hook, and that's kind of all of the additional stuff she's providing. Obviously, Rosia is going to be doing a lot more damage than Sanhua while on the field, and she's obviously going to have, because of that, greater field time as well as greater personal damage, but sacrifices field time. She's slower. Sanhua's going to have faster rotations, a lot more quick swap potential, potentially be a lot smoother to play, because in a lot of situations, her field time is around 3, 4, 5 seconds at max, and Rosia's is a fair bit longer than that, because you'll have to do this thing like her big bouncy attack where she goes Mamma Mia and then slams down 3 times. And you're going to have to cast her liberation as well, have a good bit of ER to have the smoothest rotations possible. And if you've been playing Shorekeeper, if you've been playing S0 Shorekeeper in your teams, you will have noticed that sometimes it can take a while for Camellia to run through her entire rotation. And there's a lot of potential for you to miss out on Shorekeeper's enhanced intro, her discernment, because Camellia's field time is so damn long. And when you combine that with the fact that Rosia is going to have a longer field time as well, my gosh, she might actually only be good in the Shorekeeper team if you're trying to get as much damage as possible if you have Shorekeeper's S1. But you also might simply run out of Shorekeeper's outro buff at the same time. And so this might mean that across these two teams, you're going to have a much harder and much more complex rotation where you're going to have to go on field with Rosia during Shorekeeper's Concerto buildup, and at the end of the day, have a much more complicated rotation to actually get the most out of the team. So in a lot of ways, this character is going to be way harder to play than Sanhua, have lower damage buffs, and the main upsides that you're going to be having are greater grouping, which obviously it's safe to mention that the Camellia Sanhua team has no grouping at all. You're going to have better grouping, long duration grouping, more off-field damage, and higher personal damage from the sub DPS like Rosia, but smaller buffs and a much larger field time and rotation buildup to actually activate those buffs. However, it is safe to note that at max, this ultra buff is about 7% better and, you know, will amplify Camellia's ultimate a lot more because there is that baseline havoc damage amplification. So me using the term smaller buffs isn't quite accurate here. Rosia will buff the damage more, but this attack side, right? This attack buff over here, it's not going to be as much as Sanhua's right off of the bat. As long as Sanhua is working with a Camellia that has a 5-star weapon. So in short, if you have an S6 Sanhua, this character is providing a little bit more damage on the amplification side, a lot more damage on the personal side, more off-field damage through this tornado that will persist off-field, and more grouping through this tornado that you can summon through the utility box. And so this is the pull value at the end of the day, from my opinion. If your Sanhua is at very, very low sequence nodes, and you're trying to get your Camellia team up and running and have the fastest and most success as fast as possible, you can go ahead and pull her. But you have to keep in mind that if I were to rank Rosia as like a 10 or a 9, Sanhua is easily like an 8.5 or a 9 as well. There are trade-offs to pulling this character in that, again, you're going to have a lot more effort in actually getting the rotations right, but the total damage is going to be higher. But it's not like Rosia's attack buff over here is even better than Sanhua's in the first place. And so the trade-offs are really the grouping for 80 to 160 pulls. Then you have to think about putting a weapon on her to actually get her to a 70% critical rate on Rosia to maximize this buff. And believe me when I say that it could be a little bit difficult to get here if you don't have a crit rate weapon to put on her. And so if you have something like Zhang Liao's weapon, it might be easy. Or if you have something like the Stonard BP weapon, it might be easy. But you also have to factor in that you might not have a crit rate 5-star weapon. And that means that you would need to have like a crit rate 4 cost, really good echo substats to get yourself to 70% in the first place. Or you pull her weapon. And her weapon, my gosh, it kind of sucks. I'm gonna be honest, her weapon is kind of bad. This is her weapon. It increases attack by 12%. Every time basic attack or intro skill is cast, her heavy attack increases by 48% for 3 seconds. This is one of the most specific weapons in the game. And so pulling this means, holy shit, it's kind of only going to be usable on her. And that is pretty rough. Pretty rough for a 5-star limited weapon. There are a lot of weapons like Jinxies, a lot of weapons like Carlotta's that are equipable on multiple characters and will buff many members of your roster. This is not really going to work for anybody except her, except unless you want a 12% attack stat stick with critical stats and a high base attack. Zhang Liao's weapon is honestly better, and that is one of the most specific things in the game, because that buffs resonance liberation damage, and at least it works for some of the characters on the roster. There are some characters that just don't use their heavy attack at all, like Zhang Liao, and Yanwu, bro, doesn't even use a heavy attack either. And so overall, right, this character has not a lot of competitive use cases on any team that's kind of like outside of like Havoc. You can definitely think about using her with, okay, it's showing Spectre over here, but y'all know what I'm talking about. You could also think about using her with Havoc Rover. But guys, if you have Camellia, you're not going to be using her with Havoc Rover in pretty much any situation. And if you're pulling a 5-star limited support just to use them with a free-to-play Havoc Rover, you're better off using Danjin instead. The last thing to note is that, yes, she does have a new Sonata set. that's going to be very usable on her and give her even more Havoc buffing potential, because this set will increase her Havoc personal damage and then also deal damage on outro while also giving a Havoc bonus on outro. But guys, Sanhua on this set, or Sanhua on Moonlit Clouds, is still gonna absolutely destroy content. And this also means that you're gonna have to grind, right? A new set, really get that crit rate to 70%, do all of those things, put all of that work in, and yeah, it could be a little bit rough. It could be really, really, really rough investing a lot into this character if you already have a built Sanhua. So in total, when it comes to the buffs that Roccia provides relative to Sanhua across all the different sets, right? You've got Midnight Veil, you've got Moonlit Clouds. On average, Roscia's buffing ability for a character like Camellia is going to be around 12 to 13% additional damage. And you can be the one that decides whether or not that is worth up to, you know, 160 pulls, right? You lose the 50-50 and then you go for the guaranteed. But 160 pulls is a lot for only 13% damage. But if you are somebody that's going to heavily invest in Rosia, right? If you're going to go ahead and pull all the way up to her S2, as you see over here, that's going to give you about 40% additional Havoc damage for 30 seconds and is undoubtedly going to make her the best buffer that she could possibly be. And when you combine that with the personal damage that she's going to provide, because this is a basic attack, once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you think about all of that additional damage that's also working for her as well, she is obviously going to have the highest possible contribution in a Camellia team. But at the end of the day, right, we're looking at S0 performance, not the super heavy investment. You know, as you invest more in a limited 5-star, you'll get a lot more performance, and you can decide whether or not she's worth all of that expenditure just to buff, at the end of the day, right, one team. If you're free to play, if you're a low spender, if you really like her, pull for her. If you really need the grouping, pull for her. But otherwise, if you're looking for just like damage max, you know, amplifying Camellia's damage, getting the most out of her rotations, giving her an even like easier to use playstyle, just stick with Sanhua. You have to keep in mind that Phoebe and Brant are also coming in version 2.1, and you know, depending on what their kits are, right, we might get a preview. We're going to get a preview of, I believe, Phoebe and know a little bit about what's in her kit by the time Rosia's banner is ending. And so if you are thinking about really pulling her, but you are thinking about the characters that are coming in 2.1, I do suggest waiting until the last couple of days on her banner and her weapon banner to actually pull her. But the additional value that she's providing in a lot of situations just isn't worth the expenditure when you already have an awesome option like Sanhua on the roster. So that'll be my take on this character. She's a big fucking bait, and I don't think she's worth your ass right in pretty much any circumstance. The only situation you should be pulling her is for outside of meta reasons. You just really like her design, you like Pero, you like the casket, you like all of that stuff. But if you're trying to get a meta character, the most bang for your buck in things like the tower or just combat in general, skip her. I'm being honest. Just fucking skip her. You will potentially regret your expenditures here, if I'm being honest. Because Brant and Phoebe, you don't know what they're going to provide. We already know that she already has a very, very good 4-star alternative that we've been playing with for a very long time. All right, so with that, let me know what you all think. Am I being way too much of a doomer when it comes to her kit? Is she providing a lot more than I'm actually saying? Honestly, I think I had a very fair shake with her. And I'm hoping that people don't spend a little bit too much on something that's not going to provide too much value on their account. So with that, peace out.